Good morning and welcome to another episode of Plymouth Culture's New and Alternative Business Models. And today I'm talking to Priya Krishnamoorthy, who runs an incredible organization in India called 200 Million Artisans. And as the name suggests, it's based on the premise that there are a lot of people in India who depend on traditional artisanal crafts. And 200 Million Artisans says that their mission is to promote self-reliance and innovation and to reinvent handmade. So this is something which in the Indian context, of course, means that in many communities, the economic life, the social life, the cultural life are completely integrated. So this is dealing with an issue which is not just about people's jobs. It is about people's livelihoods and people's cultures.
So going back to 2020, this was 200 Million Artisans really started out as a COVID response initiative. And to give you a very brief background about myself, I've been a champion of creativity and culture all my life. I used to be a journalist, talking to artists, musicians, craftspeople, all kinds of people, filmmakers as a journalist. And I think the one burning question I always had is how do we help them build sustainable enterprises? Where is creativity in mainstream conversations when we talk about sustainable development? And long story short, I sort of, explored this question as a Fulbright scholar, as an arts manager. And in 2020, when I was still in Boston on my Fulbright fellowship, a lot of the enterprises, and especially craft-led enterprises that I had worked with back in India, they reached out saying, we cannot pay our artisans. Priya, can you help? And at that point, there was a very strong Indian diaspora in Boston that wanted to support, but they didn't know where to go. There were no information channels that they could access, that they could reach out to and, donate money. And the communities on ground needed that kind of support. Also, what happened in COVID in India is when the first wave hit, a lot of the fundraising, a lot of the money was directed in big cities for oxygen cylinders and so on and so forth. So the rural communities got left behind in the process. And it really, at that point, started out as just a website and an information sharing website where I would curate organizations that needed the support. These were verified organizations that have a legacy of doing good work on ground. And I just started featuring them. And the reason for the name 200 Million Artisans is just literally 2 months before that. April 2020 is when 200 Million Artisans started. And just 2 months before that, I had written an article for Next Billion based on my research at Boston University on why we need to build innovation ecosystems for creative enterprises and why those need to be inclusive ecosystems, because the current ecosystems do not. You can't have copy-paste approaches for creative people. And there in that article, I come across a data that said there are 7 million artisans officially as per government data, but unofficial sources talked about the fact that there are 200 million people dependent on craft for livelihood. To me, that seemed like a massive policy and investment gap. You can't have 7 million at one end and 200 million people unofficially at the other end. And that, I think, really is why we called ourselves 200 Million Artisans, really to signal the fact that there is potential in the sector, that one, it is a sector. Two, it is a very powerful sector that is completely untapped when it comes to its potential. Three, the fact that it not only can be an incredible driver of jobs, dignified jobs in rural communities in India, but also the fact that official data says that there are, out of the artisans, 7 million artisans mapped, 50%, 56.13% of them are women. To me, that seems like a massive, opportunity and gender opportunity that we're sitting on to bring women into the workforce and to also talk about, to create those kind of pathways, career pathways for women to participate in the larger ecosystem. And that's really how we started. And then, of course, every time we went and spoke to a funder saying, hey, why don't you support the sector? There's so much potential in the sector. It's driving climate action. It is driving gender equality. It has the potential to create jobs. Every funder, every well-meaning stakeholder turned around and said, you claim that the impact exists, but where is the data? How do we believe you? And that's really where PEC came in. This was the first project that we got, and we realized that unless we talked from a data perspective, people will not take the sector seriously.
Yeah.
And that's how our first project happened.
Well, Priya, thank you for that. And I know that one of the areas that you're thinking about most is how what's called the informal economy, which is where most of the world's economic activity takes place, is not taken seriously by government. It's not measured. There's no data, as you said, but also people working informally find it difficult to access finance, find it difficult to access markets, find it difficult to access skills, and they're obviously they're vulnerable to all kinds of exploitation. So I know one of your slogans has been to make the informal the new formal, and to raise the dignity, as you said, of people working in the informal sector and the relationship that they have with government. So tell us a little bit about how you're approaching that in India.
So I'll go back to COVID. So the first wave of COVID, we started 200 million artisans. During the second wave of COVID, instead of artisans reaching out to us, there were many, many, many enterprises who reached out to us. And when I say enterprise, I mean social and creative enterprises who then employ artisans. And they could employ anywhere between 10 artisans to say 5,000 artisans, or sometimes even 50,000 artisans. Now, when these enterprises work with these communities, they are not expecting, the rural artisan to come to a factory, so to speak, and work out of a factory. These enterprises are going to the communities in dispersed rural areas across India and meeting them where they are, taking the work where they are. But as a process of this collaboration, or when they work with a very informal workforce that includes women, that includes youth, that includes, traditionally marginalized communities across India, what these enterprises also end up doing is that, one, they start giving them bank accounts. They start bringing them into the formal conversation where they say, okay, let us give you an artisan card. They start training them on financial inclusion. They start training them on capacity building and other kinds of skill building. And as a result of the social and creative enterprises working with these informal communities, the informal communities start getting agency to then participate in the larger sort of economic landscape. Otherwise, they remain excluded. Now, to give you an example, the minute an artisan, and she could be a female artisan, when she gets a bank account, she has control over her own money, which until now has been controlled by her family, her husband, and so on and so forth. The other thing that happens is the minute she starts controlling her own money and has agency on how she wants to run her life, then she also starts participating in the community, in the politics of the community, in community building. She starts sending her children to school and makes sure that the children stay in school. These are small, qualitative impact metrics that we are looking at. So there can't be data in the traditional sense of the word, but which is what we call the new formal, where we believe that enterprises, social and creative enterprises who work with craft, are engaging with informal communities in very unique and distinct ways to also bring them into the conversation of economic inclusion. We know as work from home and gig economy and how we describe it, this has already happened in India and has existed in India. And that is what this approach to working with informal communities is, what we call the new formal.
Well, one of the things, I mean, you just said that sometimes it's not just small groups of people, because I think we tend to think of artisans and handmade as being always on a very small scale.
So one of the, I think, big perception gaps when people think of the handmade is, we all think that there's an old woman sitting in a village weaving a basket, and, that's it. It's very small. It's tiny. Handmade is like all small batch and tiny, and, it can't achieve scale. What we found in our research is that scale is possible, but it's usually decentralized scale. So, instead of trying to build one factory in one city, what these enterprises end up doing is going and filtering into many, 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 many geographies. And they work with groups of, say, 20 entrepreneurs, 20 women artisans in, say, one geography, then another 20 and another 20 and another 20. And sometimes they have organizations that are supporting anywhere between 5,000 to 40,000 artisans. That's how they achieve scale, despite the fact that they are not running factories. an enterprise, artisanal enterprise of this size and scale starts getting B2B orders, they have regularity of income, which means that the enterprise also then is able to put in systems that can build efficiencies at the back end. It can build a stronger supply chain. It can hire more artisans. It can train more artisans. It can create and build better products and innovate on better products.
So tell us a little bit about how you feel you can influence the way the government sees this sector as part of India's future economy.
So at 200 million artisans, one of the questions I remember we were asked is, are you activists? And I said, no, we're not activists. Our job is really to build bridges, because everybody, be it working in at the policy level, be it people working at the investment level, be it people working at academia, I think what most people lack is information. And when they have access to the right kind of information, when they also have access to the right kind of bridge builders who are not going to, we understand that this is new. This is a new kind of sector that we are advocating for. This is also a new kind of approach that we are advocating for. So it will take time, and any kind of bridge building, be it with policymakers, be it with investors, will also to say, how do we do this together and how do we do this better? And how can we support you and how can you support us? And I think that is one of the conversations we are starting to have. And towards that end, we are also part of a research project right now, which is supported by USAID with a significant university in India, where the goal is to understand how traditional collectivizing needs to be rethought in the context of India, and how digital transformation can also aid that kind of collectivizing and help them become, access markets better, help build, better business models. Now, when we talk about business models, there are some fabulous business models that already exist in India that have responded to the needs of the Indian communities. So business models cannot be copy pasted. What works in the US is very different, or what works in the UK is very different to what works in India. Because India, like you said, 90%, over 90% of our communities work in the informal economy. Yeah. So the business models now have customized to understand and work with informal communities. And that advocacy in some ways is also something that we're starting to do with research, but also with other stakeholders. It's also equally important for academia to understand, so that we start looking at those kind of conversations and start teaching those kind of conversations in our schools, in our institutions. It's equally important to educate the investors, because they are the ones with money. And for them to understand that there are new business models where we might have to rethink expectations on returns, but there will still be returns.
What are some of the policy lessons that you're learning, either at a kind of local level or a national level, in terms of getting official bodies to take this sector more seriously and to take the whole tradition of handmade and the quality of handmade more seriously?
I wouldn't go as far as saying that we are lobbying the government. I think we hope that our work reaches them. And that's honestly all that we are hoping right now. But we have, for example, in our upcoming research, this is the first time we've spoken with government officials. We've also invited government officials to talk about the work that they are doing, so that people are also aware of the fact that government is in many ways trying to do right by the sector. In fact, they're doing a lot. There are many, many policies that the government has taken out, really advocating for, one, the sector not to be called handicrafts, handmade, handlooms, because we feel that there is it anchors a much bigger landscape. It's not just the artisans, but it's also the enterprises, it's also the other stakeholders, it's also allied industries, because it works very closely with agriculture. The raw materials for artisanal products come from agriculture, so a lot of it is value-added, input that goes in. So what we are suggesting is, and of course it's drawn from a research that came out of a very interesting global enterprise called Powered by People, who also advocated that we call this sector creative manufacturing and handmade, keeping the language in line with what ASEAN countries and Southeast Asian countries are also saying. Because China, Indonesia, a lot of these countries are now starting to call it creative manufacturing, which is unique and distinct from other kinds of manufacturing, because there is a very strong creative and cultural input that goes into creating these products and tying it with handmade. And I think that is one of the first pieces of sort of advocacy that we are really trying to push through, so that we all speak the same language. The artisan economy and the handmade sector, or the creative manufacturing sector, the three things, it's not, you can't look at it as, oh, only livelihoods, only gender, only climate. Any artisanal enterprise, any artisanal work typically will address livelihoods, it will address gender, and it will address climate. It's a nexus. And what it really, if there is an SDG that needs to anchor the creative manufacturing and handmade sector, it is actually SDG 12, responsible consumption and production.
Yes.
You know, and we never look at this sector through the lens of responsible consumption and production. This sector in any country, especially in emerging economies, can be the answer and the future answer to responsible consumption and production, because the knowledge and all these old school technologies which already exist can now become relevant if we, you know, use them.
So listen, one final question. What's your, when you're talking to people about what 200 Million Artisans does, what's your favorite story that you think captures the flavor of what you're doing better than anything else? Sorry, that's a
you threw that one. I don't know. I have too many stories, but I think one of the things that, a couple of things that have come up recently is, for example, when Business of Handmade came out, you know, this was the first time anyone talked about the sector from a business perspective. And Business of Handmade is a research platform that we created when PEC and British Council supported us. The first research focused on informality, and it had 12 beautiful case studies. And thanks to the freedom that PEC gave us, saying, you know, do it the way you want it, we were able to create a platform. It was entirely volunteer run, primarily volunteer run. 90% of it was built by volunteers and our incredible communications team. When it came out, we weren't sure what would happen. You know, we weren't sure what the impact it would create, honestly. But later, a few months later, I was told that 3 of the case studies are being taught in a very reputed school in and college in India as case studies that you know, that they're drawing from to understand business models in the sector. Somebody else then. Because now I've been looking at a lot of pitch decks of enterprises and social and creative enterprises. There was no 200 million artisans that came in before 2020. It all 200 million artisans is a hashtag that people use now. Now pitch decks start with this, you know, with the whole line that says there are over 200 million livelihoods linked to the sector. That name, so our name has become synonymous in many ways, and has given people hope, power, and potential to really sort of say that this sector deserves recognition. And I think for us, that perception shift is the best thing that we can, is what makes us happy.
Yeah, fantastic. And you know, I think 200 Million Artisans is a brilliant title, because it's a brilliant piece of branding, because it communicates a message as well as saying who you are and what you do. So Priya, listen, thank you very much indeed. That's great.